Hello everyone, welcome back to Elfbait. I'm Eli, and today I'm going to do the first campaign diary for my Vagabond Seas campaign. Vagabond Seas is the name that I gave to the Nautical campaign that I'm running for my teens and my wife on Saturday nights. There's been a couple of game sessions so far, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough content to really warrant doing a video. So this is going to be a campaign diary for the first couple of sessions, and then also some commentary along the way. So, to kind of back up a bit in case you're coming into this from the beginning, Vagabond Seas is about a group of sort of down and outers and their adventure onto the high seas, where they're going to find treasure, adventure, and the usual stuff that you find along the way. They're all really big fans of the Pirates movies and other pirate fare and just general adventure, as you know most gamers are. So this seemed like a good fit. The characters in question, I'm not going to go into character names because I'm horrible at remembering character names. But we have two tieflings, both rogues, that are they grew up in the same orphanage, and they escaped that orphanage, and now they live together on the streets. They are a couple. There is a monkey goblin rogue. The monkey goblins I borrowed from the Planeshift Ixalan from the crossover from D&D Magic of the Gathering. And then we have a dwarven transmuter, weather wizard kind of character, and an elven tempest priest who worships the merfolk god of the sea, as opposed to a human or elven god of the sea. So that's our characters. So the first session began in a rather familiar staging with a slight modification. Instead of being in an inn, they were all about kind of resting, going through their morning bit, having breakfast wherever they could afford it, kind of on out on a table in front of one of the local pubs or inns. And so as they're there, they're approached by one of their street urchin friends, Rat-tailed Jim, skinny little waifish character with a long head of hair pulled back into a tightly wound rat tail, ponytail kind of a thing. And he tells them that, he saw a shipwreck over in the next cove, over from where the party began, where the characters live, which is Beggar's Cove. On the other side of the little peninsula is another cove called Ghost Crab Cove. And Ghost Crab Cove is this place where lots of shipwrecks happen, sort of a natural wreckers phenomenon. The ghost crabs are named as such because they glow in the dark. That was my computer, sorry about that. They glow in the dark and often mislead ships, causing navigational hazards. Ships think that Ghost Crab Cove is actually Beggar's Cove and come in, hit the rocks, and are crashed. So the cove itself is littered with debris, shipwrecks, and the like. There's a huge tidal flat that's all mucky and muddy, and but the dunes that abut that are full of chunks of ship that have washed up and been buried in the sand and are generally above the waterline. So it's a place where those who can't find even a safe place on the street or anything will often go and camp under in the wreckage. Campfires, runaways, stowaways, criminals, just people who just maybe have lost their home. So this is where Rat-tailed Jim had been the night before. He was hiding from some of the local thugs in Beggar's Cove, and he saw the shipwreck in the morning. It was brand new, didn't look like anybody else had noticed it, and he ran off to tell his friends. So after some deliberation, the party decides that they are going to go ahead and check it out. They're not quite sure if it's something that they're prepared for, but Rat-tail keeps going on and on about how big the ship was, how it looked important. There was all sorts of gilding and stuff all over the ship, and he could see a noble banner over it. So this piques the party's interest, and they decide to set out on foot to head over to Ghost Crab Cove. Now, the trip is a couple of hours. a few hours over there. And the peninsula is sort of a flat, windswept peninsula, the interior of which is marked with several crude farms growing pretty robust crops that supplement the pretty meager seafare and the like that comes from that they eat in the cove. So they kind of skirt their way through farmland and some of the woodlands that are there, and they get to Ghost Crab Cove. So as they're heading to the cove, they're set upon by 3 thugs. Now, Beggar's Cove is, and the peninsula that it's on is definitely not a shining jewel of this campaign setting. It is very much backwater, where smugglers and free traders who are up to getting a little bit of illegal trade going on. It's where less reputable merchants are, criminal gangs, some pirates, and like. This is just a place where, and those who really can't make it anywhere else. So a lot of, migrant seamen and stuff like that, and sailors who are actually going to go around and just looking for a ship whenever they can. Fishermen, fisherfolk, craftsmen will gather there. But so as they come through the dunes that look down over the mud flat of Ghost Crab Cove, they are set upon by 3 thugs. Now, when I say set upon, they actually are. It starts out as your typical, where are you going? What do you got? Give me what's on you. Of course, they all play it off pretty casual. They're all street kids, and street preacher and the former apprentice of the local sea hermit who lives out on the point. So none of them are all that important. At this point, Blue is not in the game. My wife couldn't make it for the session, so her monkey goblin Blue is not in the game yet. So there's an interchange between these 3 thugs, and the 2 tieflings decide that they're just not going to take it, and so there's some intimidation and some bluff checks, and my daughter's tiefling character does a tail whip. She actually asks me, can I snap my tail like a bullwhip and try and intimidate these guys? And I'm like, okay, you can try, but understand that if you fumble this, you're going to sprain your tail. So she rolled, and she succeeded and made this nasty whip crack right next to the face of one of the thugs and managed to back them down. So it was pretty cool. They actually handled it in a role play. I was expecting a combat, but they really did find a cool alternative way to do it. So that out of the way, they then had the tidal flats to contend with. It's a bunch of really mucky, waterlogged sand, rocks, tide pools, and bits of wreckage. And it was a long ways, good trek out there, and the tide is coming in. They could see the shipwreck out there. It had a huge gash in the side. The masts were broken, but it wasn't really starting to wobble yet. And so they set out over the tidal flats. Now, as they did this, I had them make some checks, athletics or acrobatics, depending on how they were going about it. Or if they had suggestions for another skill that they could use, I would certainly let them use that as well. But they stuck mostly to acrobatics and athletics, and failure would mean that they misjudged the terrain, so they could get. And there were some things that could happen. They could get stuck, they could fall prone, or they could actually take minor damage because they scraped a rock or got caught on a piece of wreckage, and that happened a couple of times. As they went across. But the big threat was the fact that this is a tidal flat and it's a fantasy world. There are, of course, some threats. There's the ghost crabs themselves, which they weren't too worried about, because ghost crabs are these giant crabs, the giant crabs straight out of the monster manual, but they're nocturnal. So most of them are in caves or buried under the sand during the day, so they're not too worried about it, but they could disturb one and scare it. Overhead were circling flocks of birds, and the rocks on either side of the cove were home to razorbills. And for razorbills, it's just a reskinning of the bloodhawk, which is basically a pack hunting bird, which really was a good fit for these razorbill seabirds, kind of predatory seabirds that hunted in packs. Excuse me. And so as they moved across, they had no encounters with ghost crabs, which is good. But at one point, they did attract the attention of some skeletons that were in some of the wreckage. These are unfortunate souls who have been forever left behind in the wrecks. I used them as skeletons statistically, but they were just supposed to be your generic spooky encounter, 101. They didn't move as fast and as quickly as skeletons do. They were mostly there to add atmosphere and potentially a threat if the party should choose to fight them. Instead, they chose to run, which increased their chances of failing their die rolls because they were then doing them at disadvantage because the ground is so mucky and murky. The only real notable encounter on the across the mudflats was that a giant octopus in a tide pool that was kind of languishing in a tide pool till the tide came back in. Did lash out and grab one of the tieflings and started dragging her towards the pool. There was a quick bout of rescue, and they did free her. So that is kind of where session 1 ended. The kids were a little distracted that day, so we didn't get quite as far as we had hoped to. Session 2 found them having reached the wreck. So in the wreck, they had, they had a couple of options. There was the huge gaping hole in the side, but the tide was starting to come in, so that was actually partially underwater. And then there was a lot of the rigging and stuff was hanging over the sides, and so they had opted to climb the rigging and then get up on top onto the deck. Now the ship was sitting at an angle. It had listed over because, of course, it's high and dry, so it's not going to sit in the water. So it was leaning over towards the big hole in the side. They managed to maneuver around the deck without any difficulty. They did a 3-way split as far as what they were exploring. So one of the characters had gone to the back end of the ship, which was further towards the water. Went to the or two of the characters, went to the stern. One of them went to the front, and one of them took some time to examine the gate, the grating down below. So the cargo grate was, the weather wizard was looking at the cargo grate, the grating over the cargo hold, and the elf went to the bow, and the two tieflings went to the stern. The dwarf eventually joined the two tieflings in the stern, so it ended up being 3 of the party in the stern of the ship, and then the elf at the bow. So, having seen that the cargo bay was full of water at the bottom, or filling with water at the bottom, they felt that they needed to act quickly. Ship looked important, and they were able to see the glint of metal underneath the waterline, catching in the sun. And so now there's not a lot of sun. This is not a tropical pirate setting yet. They're actually sort of in a cool, temperate portage area right now. Think more like New England or the British Isles, something to that effect, northern France. So it's a little overcast, but there's still some light coming down through the skies, through the clouds up above, and so they proceed under the decks. Now, as they're going, I have to split back and forth between the two groups. So in the bow of the ship, the elf Tempest cleric is looking around, and she finds the anchor rigging and all of that, and then she goes down to the mid deck, where she finds signs of battle. There are corpses there of recently dead. They're wearing uniforms, so it suggests that this was like the banner and the gilding on the ship, that this was at least a noble or a merchant vessel with some sort of uniformity. She does start to take some time to rifle through the pockets to look for valuables. I mean, these are kind of street characters and down and outers, and while they're not evil, they're also not the most good. And survival is survival. Meanwhile, in the stern of the ship, the dwarf dwarf weather wizard and the two tieflings split up. The tieflings went to the captain's quarters, and the dwarf found what was the ship's surgeon's quarters, and he found some medical supplies and some various bits and pieces that were useful. As a wizard, of course, these mixtures and stuff were familiar to him. Meanwhile, in the captain's quarters, they found some hidden gems, a pouch of gems that were hidden behind the wash basin in there. And then in the framework of the captain's bed, they found a hidden compartment inside which was an iron box, well built, had an internal lock with just a keyhole and everything. And it was super heavy. It was really heavy. It had a handle on it. So the thieves, both of them being thieves, decided to set to trying to pick the locks. And as they did, they opened up the box, and actually at one point one of the thieves managed to break off her thieves' tools in the lock. She fumbled her skill check to pick the lock, and so then they managed to get it open. And inside the box were gold bars, and we calculated it out to be like 1,800 gold. Now that may seem like a lot for like the first adventure, but there's a reason for it. I was trying to set them up for a big score so they would have the means to set out on their adventure. 1,800 gold is still not enough to buy a ship. So they then all as a group they kind of meet kind of middle of the mid deck, and they hear some screeching and some screaming, kind of whooping and hollering from down below in the cargo bay. So they're in the cargo hold. So they then head down the steps in the cargo hold. They actually go to both ends of the cargo hold, again coming both stern and bow, and they see kind of hanging up in the rigging is Blue, the monkey goblin, whooping and hollering and screaming at the water down below. And they now can see that the hold is just full of all this gold and stuff that's just spilled out of various boxes and bags as it hit the rocks. It's all glimmering under the water, and sitting in the middle of it is a strange, like, clockwork box. This box they can see that there's all sorts of mechanisms built around it, and there's levers and dials on the front of it. And so they start to go towards it, and then they realize there appears to be a reef shark, some sort of small, hunter shark, prowling around in the water down there, and that's what Blue is whooping and hollering at. So the dwarf, with some quick thinking, utilizes some magic and uses I can't remember the spell for the life of me. Basically, he's able to move the water. I think it's control water, to be honest. He clears a path, and they're able to move around and stuff. And as they're working around how to get this out of here, they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to free the cargo netting that Blue was hanging from, drop it down, lever the crate into the clockwork crate into the net, and then hoist it up to the deck and take it with them, because they don't really figure out how to get into it yet, or they don't want to take the time yet. So as they're going through the motions, they've got everybody down below doing their things, and they send the cleric up to the top deck to get the cargo hoist ready. And as she's doing so, she notices the bow of a ship coming around the point at the edge of the cove, and coming around the way at the edge of the cove. And so she kind of freaks out and calls down below, "Hey, looks like there's a ship coming in." And so they kind of start to speed up and hightail it. They start hoisting it. They actually use the anchor device, the nautical term. I think it's the capstone or capstone, whatever it is. The little the dial basically that they use to weigh the anchor. They detach the anchor from that and actually attach the cargo rope to that, and they all quickly work to just lift it up. As they're doing so, the ship rounds the bend, and they can see, they're all up on the deck now working the dial, and except for the monkey goblin can't reach the ground, so the monkey goblin's just kind of keeping an eye out on the ship, and the ship comes around, and there's a flag flying. The monkey makes a perception check and sees that there's a glint. It can notice a lens flare from the ship, and assumes that they've been spotted. They were, and so they then take out their own telescope or spyglass. The two tieflings had chipped in with their starting gold and bought a spyglass, and so they look back and they notice that yes, they have been seen, and that there's somebody on the deck that is watching them, and they take a look at the flag that's flying from the mast, and it's this red banner with a stylized cuttlefish, and they tell the tieflings tell what they see, and Blue instantly freaks out, because Blue, being a actual seafarer, the only sailor in the actual party, is between ships, but recognizes it as the banner of the Red Devil, and the Red Devil is a local pirate, kind of the scourge of these particular seas, and so they realize that they're really in deep at this point, because here they are, they're having the Red Devil bear down, and they are they're certainly outmanned and outgunned. So as if it wasn't enough that they had saw the Red Devil, about the time they make out the flag on the ship, they hear the boom of cannon shot, and the shot flies well overhead and lands in the sand. At that point, they're like, "Oh, we gotta go. We've been spotted. They're shooting at us." And so they start to unload things. They start to try and figure out what they can do, and they realize they can't lift the clockwork crate. And so what they ended up doing is, they decided they either have to leave it here or at least try and open it and figure out what is in there. So at this point, the wizard starts. The wizard, with the assistance of the two thieves, actually three thieves, although the Blue is at this point still watching the ship, the crew that's coming in, or the ship that's coming in. They all combine forces and try and figure it out. And I kind of imagine it as, the wizard is applying his arcane knowledge of certain devices and things, so he's actually using his arcana skill, and the two thieves are using their thieving skills and their thieves tools to sort of recognize or intuit the devices. This does this does that, and he's like, okay. So they're all collaborating. So I gave him a roll at advantage, because they're putting 3 minds to this, and they managed to get it open. And inside they see a strange gold artifact. It's set in a frame in the middle of the box, and it looks like these rings of odd shapes and squiggles and little characters and stuff that are all arranged in concentric circles. And so they ask some questions. They figure it out. They figure out that these things slide, and certainly that they're rings, and they start working at getting the rings figured out. And so the rings end up forming a map, and once they form the whole map, they actually, once they get the last ring in place and they can see the map, these little panels pop open on the edges, and these 12 little tiles pop out, and these 12 little tiles have some sort of characters in some language in them, on them. So this ring, this thing that they found, is this map. Seems to show an island. It doesn't have a designation like X marks the spot or anything like that, but it is a map of an island. But it's also solid gold and impossible for them to just carry. I mean, they try to figure it out, but by this time a second cannon shot has flown overhead and hit the beach, And now it looks like the ghost crabs are starting to wake up. They're starting to see the sand shift and stuff. Too many cannon shots, and also the red Devil's ship has started to lower. They started lowering longboats into the water, and the longboats actually by this point are about 2/3 of the way to the shore. So they've got to make a quick decision. So the wizard actually pulls out parchment and charcoal and does a rubbing of the map. Good thinking on the part of the wizard. He's got his wizard's kit, so he's got actually paper and charcoal and stuff like that. At the same time, they gather all the tiles from the side, because those are manageable, even though they themselves are also made out of gold. They do carry, they take them with them, and they beat feet across the mudflats. They manage to hit the mudflats and start running well before right as the pirates are starting to land. And so the pirates hit shore, but at that point the ghost crabs are actually waking up. They're coming out of the sand, they're sloughing it off, and they're just starting to snap their pincers in threat posture. And so the party ends up on one side of the ghost crabs, and the pirates end up on the other side of the ghost crabs. So behind the party, the pirates are actually having to engage the ghost crabs that they didn't expect to run into when they came ashore. So the rest of the party is at this point kind of hightailing it up into the dunes, and as they come over the dunes, there's a mob of thugs. The thugs that they had actually managed to bluff off or intimidate away when they arrived at the cove had gone and got reinforcements, and so they're now faced with this group of men. And before they even have a chance to really get into it, the dwarf is like, it's the red devils, and yells out the name of the pirates, and the pirates that have just landed, and instantly, after a bluff check, with advantage because of the name being invoked, they managed to actually scatter the thugs. That means for the second time these thugs have been thwarted by just words and a little bit of intimidation. But it was quick thinking on the part of my nephew and his character, and so I really liked that. I mean, it's such a piratey moment where you make it out of the danger, and then you get up to the top of the dunes, and suddenly there's another threat. It's very Indiana Jones, very Pirates of the Caribbean, and then she just disperses by screaming the name of the most dread pirate in the local waters. Sends everybody scattering. So at that point, the party then heads off back to Beggar's Cove, at which point it's starting to get dark, or get a little later in the day at least. And so they kind of hunker down and make a plan. So this is a little bit of a downtime activity. They decide that what they want to do is they want to take their money, and they want to hire a crew. They're not going to be able to buy a ship outright unless they bought like a fishing boat. And while it can manage the open seas, it's not going to manage high seas or any kind of storm or anything like that. You might, but they're really not wanting to. So Blue starts asking around some of the crews that they know of, that Blue knows of. And so Blue is a female monkey goblin, so she's cruising around asking stuff. They're just kind of making plans. At the same time, Blue is also looking to offload the gems that she had managed to. One of the things that I forgot to mention is as they're escaping, as they're leaving the cargo hold, Blue is running along just like a insane monkey, just grabbing any sort of strand of pearls or jewels or whatever that she can and looping it over her neck and on her arms. And we had this image of basically she comes off the ship and she's looking like this Michelin man of jewelry, ringlets and bracelets all up and down the arms, beads and necklaces, looking like some sort of Mardi Gras participant, and even a chalice full of jewels in her tail, her prehensile tail as she runs out. She lost a lot of that running across the mudflats, but she ended up with enough. So she's trying to fence this stuff while she's also trying to recruit a crew. She went the fast and dirty way, only got 20% of what the actual value was, so I gave her a choice. You can look for reliable fences that are going to give you a good deal because they can take the time to find a buyer, or you can just take it to the local dirty fence who's going to go ahead and just, here, I'm going to give you this, take it or leave it. But at this point, you know, they didn't think they had a lot of time. They figured that at some point the Red Devils are going to get wise that, you know, somebody else knows the information, you know, somebody else knows about what was in the crate, because the Red Devils, you know, may very well have taken the wreck. They don't know what happened, but there was an entire pirate ship full of crew, and yes, there were ghost crabs, but it's doubtful that they would be able to stop them entirely. So they make their plans, they get set up, they find a captain. At this point, there was a little bit of collaborative role play. I asked my wife and the rest of the table, I'm like, so what's the name of your captain? You know, I'm giving them a chance to play into it. I'm like, what's the name of the captain you found? And somebody belted out Jon Snow. And I'm like, okay, so you found yourselves one Captain Johannes Frost. He's the captain of the White Wolf. Just kind of running with their gag. So, now they have Johannes Frost as the captain they hired, and his ship, the White Wolf. So they make a deal. They don't have the gold to really pay for the ship outright. What they do is they decide that it's going to be a 6-way split. Each of the party members will have one share, and the captain and his crew will have a full share of whatever it is they find at the end of this. Now, the captain, of course, will have to divvy his shares up amongst the crew, but it's still a pretty good take. I mean, 6 shares, and then, you know, they will go on their way. They also paid the captain 20 gold up front as a deposit, so that's a pretty sizable chunk of change in an economy that's going to be mostly silver and copper based. And we left off right on the day of their departure. There was a bit of a run-in with a local thug who had heard from Rat-Tail Jim, who they had actually left behind. You notice there's not a lot of talk about Rat-Tail Jim and what's going on here. Part of that is because everybody, including me as the GM, kept forgetting that Rat-Tail Jim went with them to the sand dunes, to the wreck. So Rat-Tail Jim, we figured, got left behind, and at this point, or made his way away. They didn't know what the fate of Rat-Tail Jim is until they're actually going to leave, and they get kind of the 2 tieflings get cornered by this heavy who says that he heard that they made a score and he wants it, and then he pulls Rat-Tail Jim out from behind him, who's been beat up a bit, and you know Rat-Tail Jim kind of, you know, hey, you left me behind, I don't owe you anything. And so they kind of feel bad and kind of feel betrayed. The tieflings are kind of, the two tieflings generally are played more towards their demonic, to their infernal nature, I think, because they're really kind of cutthroaty. But they decide to, you know, they have this interchange, and at the same time, the dwarf had been going to meet up with them, and so he comes across the alley where they're having this interchange with this heavy, and he uses one of his spells to chuck a rock at him and hits him in the head with it. Uses the catapult spell. So at this point, the thug, and he exits. So yeah, I mean, that was the session that we left off there. We're going to pick up with them leaving in the next session. That's going to be 2 weeks from now. I run the Saturday game every other week, and then so from here we've got, you know, what's going to happen. You know, is the Red Devil on their tail? Is their departure going to be uneventful? You know, what happens? They're going to set sail, and this is where the campaign really takes off. As far as a couple of technical notes, when they were working on getting the box open, the clockwork vault, that was done as a skill challenge. They had to get 3 successes before 5 failures. And so I gave them an assortment of skills that they can use, and made it clear that they couldn't use any one skill twice in a row. They had to actually go back and forth, so they had to pick and choose. And so it was a collaboration between the thieves and their device skills and the arcana skill of the mage. They managed to do it. They only got like 1 failure, so they actually did it in pretty quick time, I figured. The failures would have meant more time, and so the pirates would have been closer to them the more failures there would be, because that would mean, I would assume that each failure was a bit of a setback, maybe a tumbler or something like that. So that was really fun. They seemed to enjoy it, and getting the party together. One thing I liked about the skill challenge done is it really got them thinking as a whole. Something must have gone right, because this time, rather than towards the end of the session where it was like, oh, I'm tired, or can I go hang out or whatever. Not that they don't like playing, but this time they actually asked to go longer, so that was cool. But we'll see. This is the kickoff for the Vagabond Seas campaign. I've got a lot planned, and with a nautical campaign, you can go a long ways. You've got all sorts of islands they can run into, ports that they can stop into, things that can happen to them that can cause them to have to go, one place or another. There are sea monsters. There are sea cultures. There are events, hauntings, weather. Who knows what they're going to run into on their way to whatever this island is on the map that they found. They've got coordinates. This is one thing I forgot to mention. They've got the coordinates off the tile, but they don't know. They had to convert them from the language that they were in to modern measurements. So they know where they are. They don't know what is there. They just know that there's an island there. The map, again, doesn't have any kind of X or anything like that. So they're on their way, and we'll see where they end up. Anyways, this is Eli with Elfbait. Thanks for tuning in again. Comment below questions about nautical campaigns, things I did, comments, suggestions. How do you run this kind of stuff? Go ahead and put them down below. Like, share, and subscribe. You can email me at baittheelf@gmail.com. You can follow at the Elfbait Facebook group. And I'm also on Twitter as Elfbait, so always happy to answer questions, take suggestions there as well. But as always, the important thing is to get out and game, and thanks for coming by.